Okay, also welcome from my side. My name is Carsten Tellmann. I'm not a student anymore. Actually, I'm working for GData. That's an antivirus company located in Bochum. And we are supporting this course since a few years now. And yeah, what does it mean if I say we support the course? Actually, we are offering an additional evening event every time you have an invited speaker here. So basically, after the talk and after the discussion around here, we are going over to the rooms of my company. We have a nice and cozy atmosphere, some food and drinks and everything, and we hope to see a few people of you there who are interested in getting in touch with the speaker a little bit more in detail, asking more detailed questions about the topics he is presenting today, or if you're interested in simply talking to people, especially the technical people working in the antivirus business, that's a good place. We really just want to offer a place where you can have deeper discussions in addition to the talks and the topics we are presenting here. Because it's the first time in this term that we have this event, most of you will not have noticed that we have this additional event. So the possibility will be available every time we have an invited speaker here, and I can really recommend it. And if you have some questions about more details, the address can be found here, but don't hesitate to come to me after the talk and just ask a few more questions if you're interested. So without any further delay, let's enjoy the talk.
Thank you. So, hello. Today I'm going to speak about Adobe Reader and some of the weird features it has. But let's first introduce myself. I'm Alexander Inführ. I'm from Austria. I'm studying information security. I also work as a pen tester for Q53. And for 1 year I worked for the Microsoft Corporation as an external tester. Basically we tested EE. I'm interested in web security, browser security, and everything that interacts with the web. So, why do we talk about PDF? First of all, they said to me, hey, do a presentation here. We have a place for you. And I always wanted to talk about PDF and look at the features it has and if the problems. And it's like a really big topic to talk about. You will see in the next slide why. And also, I'm not going to talk about memory corruptions, because there are a lot of people who look at memory corruptions, exploit them, the Chinese, etc. So we are looking only at the features. So how many pages do you have to read? Actually, there are not all of the specification Adobe Reader can pass. But the first one, the PDF specification itself, the JavaScript specification, XFA specification, FDF, XFDF, another JavaScript API, why not? And there's also FormCalc. What is missing? There is also a specific PDF font type, but it's only in PostScript, so it's not that interesting. And as you can see, it has more pages than Harry Potter together, so it takes some time to read everything about all features. So in the beginning, I will show you how a PDF looks like. Not everything, I will skip through the important parts. Then I will talk about the security they have implemented. Then we have to talk about the JavaScript in PDF, of course. I'm also presenting you a vulnerability there, which is actually quite cool, which lets you read local files from the user. Then we're going to talk about unknown features like XFA, FDF, whatever. And in the end, I have a list what's still there, what features I haven't looked at. So, how does a PDF look like? Basically, it consists of objects which define themselves, and then they're referencing another object like, hey, I need a font, look at object 2. Object 2 defines this font and the text and the style or whatever. And there are four things you need, at least they say four. There is the header with percentage PDF. Then you have your objects, which are the document itself. Then there is the XREF and the trailer. But you can in reality, you can't just ignore the XREF completely. It will never crash or change anything on the document. It will always work. So I never looked at it anyway. So an example is very simple. First, you specify the header. The version is not that important. At least it only has to begin with a 1, if I'm correct, or with a number. Then you need the trailer. The trailer is only needed to specify where is the root object. In our case, this is object 1. And object 1 specifies itself as a type catalog. And this is the most important object to test because it specifies actions. Like in this case, we use open action. It triggers action when the PDF is opened. It also specified as that the definition is in object 7. If you look at the other objects, they are only used to define a page. That's the first page, which has a random text. I think it's JavaScript example and how it's styled. So they're not really interesting. Just look at the object 7. So we triggered it via open action. It's executed as soon as the PDF opens. And one object would be using /URI. This action would open any URL you specify there. Most of the time, it will ask the user for confirmation. If it's not, if he clicks on allow, then it's permitted for the lifetime to open this URL. Or you can use the JavaScript action and execute JavaScript, which is much more interesting, actually. So what are actions there? What action do we have? There is the open action, which is the most used one because it fires when the PDF is open. But there are 21 additional events. Most of the time I use the will close event or the open action event because both of them have to fire anyway. If the user is not killing PDF with Task Manager, the event will trigger. But you can also trigger it if it's saved or printed or it was printed. So it's quite a lot of events you can trigger JavaScript as an example. And these actions are used to trigger specific action types. There is a list I will show you, and one of them is JavaScript. And you have to know that some JavaScript function rely that you're not using open action. I don't know why, but if you're using will close, it will work anyway. Just so if you test these things and you run in a security error and you just don't know why, change the event which is triggering it. So actions, which are the things which makes PDF dynamic. There is a big predefined list. You could extend them via plugins. I have never seen it, and also hadn't tried to extend it myself. I just looked at the ones which are per default in it. And there are some really interesting ones. You have go to R and go to E, which tell PDF, hey, go to this location, open the PDF. Although go to E says only go to embedded files, you can specify any location you want. Doesn't matter. Then there is this famous launch option, which was used to fool user into clicking OK and start cmd.exe. I think there's even a Metasploit module for this one. You have the URI action type, you have the JavaScript action type, import data, you can submit forms. You can really do a lot with these actions. As always, the JavaScript one is the interesting one. So let's look at some of the security. So there's enforced security. With this, I mean there is a registry key in local machine, which is called feature lockdown. It's quite, I think, 5-6 entries, but only 2 are really interesting. The second one I put here is in current user. And as an example, this one saves all PDFs which are allowed to open a URL. So if a user clicks allow, it's actually there. There is more security stuff on the client side, but it's way too much if I'm in the time to talk about all of this. So I'm just mentioning the important ones. The first one, default launch attachment terms specify the attachments, extensions a PDF is allowed to have. So if there is a .exe attachment, a user cannot save it. If it's a PDF, he can save it. If it's like I'm a dolphin, he will get asked with a dialog, hey, this could be malicious, watch out. But the interesting part of it is that it's possible with JavaScript to export attachments automatically without user interaction. This specific function is called export data object. And it's only callable from privileged context. I will going to explain in some slides what the privileged context is. But first have a look at the parameters. In the past, this was a really cool function. First, you need the name of the attachment you want to export. Then you could specify the file location where you want this file to be saved. But it's not longer supported anymore. And there is a launch parameter. It has values 0, 1, and 2. 0 is boring. 1 asks the user to save it and then tries to execute it. And second is don't ask the user and execute it immediately. So that's the reason why they're only allowing PDF and FDF as an extension, because it's quite a powerful feature, I think. So if you find a way to get privileged JavaScript execution, which is not really that difficult, and then fool the extension parser, which was also fooled in the past, then you can take over a system with just the PDF and one line of JavaScript. The second one I mentioned is the default launch URL terms. Yeah, this is a list of allowed and forbidden protocols which you are able to use. The difficulty is to know where it's actually applied. So I tried it with go to E and go to R, and I'm going to show you now what will happen. Yes, your user. So interesting. It's basically go to HTML is embedding a PDF called go to PDF .pdf. I'll show you how it looks like. So we are triggering with our action and just specifying we go to R, or you can also use go to E, it doesn't matter. You jump to file, C in this case. You can also use every protocol EA supports is possible. Only JavaScript and VB-script seem to be blocked. So if you're able to load a local HTML file as an example and know how to bypass the local lockdown, because EA is kind of locked down for local files, so it won't execute JavaScript or anything. You can use it to read local files, or if you know any trick to use a protocol which you can type in the URL of EA, then it would be possible to use it via PDF too. It's not that critical, but I think it's quite interesting that the blacklist is not that strong. And they admitted it's a bug, so. Where is it? So let's talk about privileged JavaScript. Adobe supports JavaScript, and they're using an old version of SpiderMonkey engine, and they have modified it. They would have to publish it to don't violate the licensing, but they always say, yeah, we're going to. and they never have. So what have they changed? They have one non-privileged context and a privileged context. The non-privileged context is kind of boring. You can use it to make alerts or beep or change the text color or something like this. And the privileged API can read local files from the local file system. It can use the net.http API. You can save attachment, as you have seen, and there is much more. So how do you get privileged context? The one way is there is a local file folder in the installation folder of Adobe, which is called JavaScript. And if you place a JavaScript file there, it can call a privileged JavaScript and also use this power to create functions which are privileged. This is possible via a trusted function. You just pass the function name in it, and then it's a trusted function. And if it's called, it can use app_begin_priv, which starts the privileged context, and the end_priv, which is then drop the additional rights. But there is a second way. They also have a trust propagator function. Such a function is not trusted by default. Only if it's called from a trusted function, it inherits this trust and call app_begin_priv and end_priv. So as an example, if we specify two files called mark and call, and mark gets a function and marks it as a trust propagator function, and then we have the call function, which is also trusted and just calls a function which will get passed. We can mark our function and call it. But if we just call it directly when it's marked, you will get a security error by app_begin_priv that you're not permitted to do so, because it didn't inherit trust like it should. So last but not least, there are certified documents. They can be used to get specific rights you need. Also, sometimes you need it for function which will work in Adobe Reader Professional, but not in Adobe Reader. Actually, I haven't looked that much into it. But yeah, you can sign your certificate. You can sign your PDF, and then basically the document is in your document is your certificate and a signature, and it's not possible to modify the PDF anymore. Yeah, but as I told you, I haven't looked really into this feature. So let's talk about JavaScript. It's more than 700 pages. It can play sounds, modify fields. As I told you, alert boxes. It can beep. It can change the location via these two functions. It can read local files. It can manipulate and save attachments. So it's quite powerful, actually. It can also pass XML. So I looked through it and thought, OK, it passes XML. Let's check for XXA attack. Maybe I'm also finding a way to get privileged JavaScript, because already some people in the past managed it too. Good. Change the URL to JavaScript was also an issue in the past. But actually, I didn't find anything new. I'm still investigating, because there are so many locations where you can specify a URL. I haven't tested all of them now. And then I tried to infect the system with attachments, because it would be really cool to just open PDF and the CMD pops up or anything like this. But right now I haven't found a bypass for the extension parser. And last but not least, there is a really weird behavior that it's possible for attachments to specify an external stream. So you basically say, hey, I have an attachment. Look at the local file system under C. And then the Adobe Reader, if you look in Process Monitor, it will read this file, but then it will report access denied. I don't know why, because the reading is a success, but then it will say fail. So I hope I can work around this problem. So let's start with XML. Are all familiar with XXA, or should I explain it to you? Okay. So first, there was this paper called Polyglots Cross Origin Formats, and they found a XXA attack, and it was in XML data.parse. And I tested it. Yeah, it was fixed. Damn. But when you read this through the JavaScript reference, there is a line which says, "Hey, there is load XML. It's on the XFA data DOM, and it basically does the same thing." So where do you get this XFA object from? Yeah, XML data.parse will return an XFA object. So it was quite easy to test for it. So what this basically does is, in the first string, you save normal XML, which will get passed via XML data.parse. Then you have this XFA object, which supports load XML. And in this XML, we pass XML doc2. And as you can see, you can specify entities which are referenced from an external system. So basically, you're telling, hey, yo, go to example.com and fetch, in this case, the index file, and then put it there where A is referenced. And what do you think? Did they patch only XML data.parse or load XML too? I will show you now. So we're having here a local file, I think. What it's basically doing is, if I go to attacker.com, well, it's a what's up hello. That's in, if I go show you, it's reading basically the readme.html file. So as you can see, there is, you have to think, you have to know that this is on the point from websites which are hosting PDFs. I mean, most of the websites allow to upload PDFs. But the problem is it's same origin only. So if it's not allowing to upload PDF, you can't use it. So you can't read the website in the context of the user. The other the real problem is HTML is not well formed. It will break the XML. Normally you would use dynamic entities, but Adobe XML parser doesn't support it. Then I tried UTF-16 because I thought maybe it won't break because HTML is normally in UTF-8. But of course, the XML parser doesn't support it either, so it's not that cool. But it can at least read JSON data from Twitter or something like this. So let's jump to JavaScript privilege escalation. This was reported this year, actually, from Gabor Molnar. I haven't heard of him before. What he does was basically he defined an object called T, defined two setters for user and doc. Then he grabbed the prototype of app to simulate the functions of app. And then he called dynamic anode store via .call. If you're using .call, you can specify a this object which you want to use. In this case, it's this modified T object. And you can see on the left side what the original code did and what it led to, what actually code was executed then. So this was a trusted function. So this .doc gets to app begin priv because it had a setter on it, which would call it with T and null. So it has no parameters anyway, so it will just start to get into this privileged mode. And then it will call app trusted function because this .user is actually app.trusted function. And now the parameter f, because user is his function f or his payload, is now a trusted function. And if he calls it now, he can use it to, as an example, read local files. I checked it, it's really fixed. So I started to look at all the predefined functions Adobe has. It's quite, they have a lot of functions, can tell you. They come compiled in a really weird format, in SpiderMonkey 8.5 XDR byte format, but Gabo Molnar already released a tool which will dump it for you, even nicely formatted. So that was easy. Then I tried to string or overwrite value of. I used also setters, getters, whatever, but none of them worked. So I then start to read again the function, and there's this interesting function entrust propagate all. And I think this function is really stupid because it has just one parameter, which is an object. They iterate over this object, and all properties which are functions, which are basically, it's still my object which I pass them, are marked as a trust propagator function. So basically I can give them an object with properties which are pointing to my function, and they are iterating over them and say, okay, if it's a function, now it's a trust propagator function. I don't know why they need such a function, but okay. So I started to create my payload. I define an object with a property root, which points to the function test. And I called entrust propagate all. So it's marked now. But now we need a trusted function which calls my function. But that's actually not really difficult in JavaScript, because as an example, there is nStart approval. So you have a function which has, again, one parameter, which is only checking for if doc exists or if I have passed anything. On if doc.path exists. And if it exists, it will try to call the function match on it, which you normally call on string, and tries to see if it starts with HTTP. But again, it's my object, and who says that path is a string? Who says that match is the function which does what it should do? Actually, that's where we call our function. I forgot to make it full screen, I see. Sorry. So now you can see better, I think. So what do we have to do? We take our object. Now we have also a path property. And this path property has a match property, which is now our pointing to our function. We still have this other one, the root, to get marked. Okay, we call entrust propagate all. We are marked, call nStart approval, and now we are in privileged mode. As a payload, I always use util string from stream and string from file, read file into stream, because it's, I think, the most powerful to read files from the local file system. I have to say it's not possible to read files which are in the profile of the user, but it's possible to read every other file location. So Windows is not protected, as an example. And I'm going to show you that it worked now. So I'm reading, I think, a file. Oh, I think I'll show you the payload itself. So we have, so that's how it looks. We're reading system23 xwizard.dt. I just tried this one. Can you read anything actually? No. Better? Yeah, ZBG dark is purple, okay, thank you. So we are reading, I just tried to read from system 33 to 32 to check if it's protected or not. We can also read from the C folder itself, but nothing which is in the user folder. So it will read it, and then we alert it so we can see it. Normally you would send it to yourself. So we open again our favorite browser. Go to demo. So, and now we get, boom, this big alert box. This is the content of the file. As I told you, if you know any other interesting file, like a configuration file of another program which is installed, I would prefer to read this. So this is the dialog which gets actually opened by the function which I misused. Because I'm not triggering any error or anything else at all, you can, it will execute. If you just make any nonsense which will break the JavaScript parser, it won't display. So let's talk about the other features. So there is FDF, which is used to share form data. Then there is XFDF, also the same thing, but in XML. Then there is XFA, also for form data, but you can also execute scripts, actually two scripts, two different languages. Then there is XDB. It was used in the past because you can specify a PDF, you can encode it in base64 and put it there, and then Adobe Reader can still read it, but it bypassed, I think, most of, if not all of the current antivirus system back then. Then there's also the XFA configuration information. I don't know what it does actually, I just recently found it. It's also not in all specification. It also has a lot of features. I still have to look what it really does. So there is a lot of things in PDF. So FDF. Yeah, as I told you, you specify data. So form it's actually used to share form data between PDFs. That's what it should do. The differences in the specs are really weird because the spec for FDF is actually useless. And the same for XFDF is quite a good read. And also, if you want to write FDF, just check in XFDF how to write it in XML and then put it back there. I haven't found anything new, but I will show you a cool attack in the past, I think from 2010. Yeah, it was about a user goes to your website, attacker.domain in this case, opens a FDF file, and when you look at the F switch, you will see there is a URL. So the F switch is telling the Adobe Reader, yeah, this data belongs to this PDF, open it, change the location to it, and it will do that. And after the location is changed, he will execute the JavaScript, which does a submit form, which loads another FTF from the attacker domain. Because the submit form is now a different domain, because we're already in target domain, the user will get a warning, hey, there is cross origin, do you really want to do that? But all you need to do is using open redirect vuln. Most of the time you will find one, and then there was no warning at all. And the last step was for the FDF file, for the alert FDF, to specify via the F switch, yeah, this FDF file belongs to JavaScript alert document location. And then he changed the location to JavaScript and executed the JavaScript in the context of target.domain. And so you could do cross-site scripting on this side. Yeah, it's fixed. I haven't found anything new like this. It's not that easy anymore to specify just JavaScript and it will work. Maybe you can find one. So that's my favorite one, XFA. It's a template for form data, and you can specify events on it and execute JavaScript. You will see how it looks. It's a little bit confusing. In the past, it was used by malware authors to hide their payload because antivirus system didn't look for their XFA object because they didn't know that, or they didn't realize there is also a way to execute JavaScript there. But let's look what it actually supports, because it doesn't only support JavaScript, it also supports FormCalc. I haven't heard before of this scripting language or anywhere else. It's everything event-based, so on click or whatever, it triggers JavaScript execution. There's a big list in the specification what is where supported and which event is when triggered. And yeah, let's have a look at FormCalc. or at least I had, it was the first thing I had a look at. It sounded really boring, so yeah, we can do some calculations and also string functions. But really at the end, there is the UL built-in functions. And this can, one-shot style, read any website and post it anywhere. So you have get, retrieves a file, then you have post, two mandatory parameters, where you want to post and what do you want to post. So you have to think in JavaScript, there is not the possibility to do that. So there's no XML, HTTP request or anything like this. And in FormCalc, you have one function with one parameter, we can do the same. I don't know if they forgot it or maybe, or they don't care. But there are some problems because the function is same origin. If you have no same origin policy bypass, I actually found one, but I can't show you today how it works. As soon as I've patched it, I will. It's not that difficult actually. But if you still want to use it in the context of a web hosting website, this is still a threat because if someone uploads a PDF, and so if you allow it, he can just say to a user, hey, this is my PDF. He will open it and can interact with the website in the name of the user. So it's still quite powerful. But you have to think of, if you transmit it back to your server, it's cross-origin, and he will look for this cross-domain XML file. You just have to specify, yeah, allow it for everywhere, and then it will work. And I'll show you a demo how this looks. Oh, sorry. First I'll show you the file, because then you can see how weird it looks. So I used an example XFA because when reading the specification, so here's the XFA object specified. Still, I need so better? Yeah, I think so. So there is this template specification, which is the one I looked at, where you can specify the JavaScript, and it's in object 1. There are also other. You can also specify dataset and config. I didn't find for all of them a reference in the specification, so I don't know where they have got it from. But let's have a look at the template. Yeah, template, a lot of data. Let's jump to the interesting part. There you see we have an event. So the event tag is really called event. And then you call the action type, in this case it's a click. Then the default script language is anyway always FormCalc. And then with one line, yeah, I want to read readme.html and post it to attacker.com. You have to remember all the time, if the user is logged in, the cookies are transmitted because it's in the browser. They're always, if PDF makes a request, all the cookies are always sent. That's always in the context of the user. So if we go to the test.com, so this is how it looks. As you can see, I haven't changed much from the test file I took. And the event is in the first box. If I click on it, it will say, hey, you cannot change it, blah, 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 okay. And now you see actually nothing. But it, we now have read the readme.html in this example and send it to our server. And it's now saved. I save it in temp. Yeah, that's it's not that interesting. I didn't write that much into the README. Normally, there would see, in case of, let's think about Facebook, Twitter, what else, you would see like his friends or whatever, what you're interested in. I had no internet, so I couldn't show you with Facebook anyway. So, but you have to always think, if you're uploading or allowing PDF, it's not text and pictures. There is really a lot behind it. It can read from same origin most of the time, if you know how. And if you find a bypass for the same origin policy, you can read in even if you're not allowing PDF, you still could be attacked, or you can read from the context of the user. So it's really terrifying what this thing can do. And the next thing is, I told you that that I didn't look for memory corruption bugs. I just tried to ignore them, but it was impossible. It crashed from alone, 2 times actually. And one was exploitable, at least the exploit, also the MSEC command line, also it's extension for WinDebug, where you can just say exploitable, and it will tell you how most likely it will be exploitable or not. The first one was categorized exploitable, but it seems like someone else found it before because it was fixed in the last patch. Another one which I found is still unfixed. They said I shouldn't show you the code. At least they want to see themselves if it's exploitable or not. If it's not exploitable, I'm allowed to show it to you. So, what's left? There are still features I haven't mentioned. You can actually load Flash in PDF. That's no problem. But if in EA, the funny thing is, in Internet Explorer, it's not using Internet Explorer's engine for Flash. It's using the Flash you're installing for Firefox. So if it's not installed, yeah, if you just have Internet Explorer and you try to use this feature, it won't work. But if you have installed Firefox with Flash, it will work. I don't know if this is a bug or I don't know, but it's fact. I tried it a lot of times and I was like, what the hell is going on? But yeah. Then, as I told you, certified documents, I haven't checked them. Then XFA, the specification is longer than for PDF itself, so it takes some time to read and understand and what it does or should does. Yeah, there are also multimedia features. There is features for videos, for sound. You can even draw 3D objects. Yeah. Then there are external streams, as I told you. They're quite some fun, especially for attachments which are not really attachments. Then there is an ActiveX undocumented function in EA, which is called execcommand, which takes one array, and I don't know what has to be in that array to do anything, but I hope I will find out. Even in the PDF forum, they say, no, don't use it, it's undocumented, and no, just no, don't use it. So it sounds quite interesting, actually. I haven't mentioned filters. Filters are used for, if you want to compress your data in an object, you can use filters, and there are quite a list of filters you can use. Then your PDF looks it's not readable anymore, like when you write it yourself with Notepad. So if you open a PDF you will download, you will most likely see a filter and just garbled text. So it's interesting for obfuscation. Yeah, that was it. I put all the references I needed here. So thank you for your attention.